This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I'm sure everybody's still buzzing over the Super Bowl, right? It's funny, I was actually thinking about recording the NWA review on Sunday night since I had a couple hours of free time before I went to bed. Then I sat down and I'm like, wait a minute. That's a horrible idea. There's going to be endless screaming and partying going on in the rooms around me. Why would I even attempt to record anything right now? Oh, and then as it turns out, there was like virtually no noise at all. Because then I remember that everybody that lives in my apartment complex is either old or late night shift workers. So it was oddly quiet. Instead, I decided to watch some Chris D'Elia stand up, which was totally worth the investment. One of my favorite comedians out there today. I don't care about all the grape allegations. He's still one of the funniest men on the planet. So anyway, we're doing this recording the day after. I still don't know who won the Super Bowl. I don't care. I never care about sports because I think all sports are dumb and a waste of time. I live outside Cleveland, and Lord knows our football team is the laughing stock of the nation. You know, at least when I lived in Pittsburgh, it was semi-appropriate to talk about the Steelers publicly. You weren't going to get shot at for supporting a football team that was actually good at one point in time. But now that I'm an Ohio native, it's a little different. Although I got to give them credit. People in Cleveland are very passionate and loyal football fans. It is quite mind-boggling, actually, to see how many people avidly support a team of losers. Guess that kind of says something about Cleveland, doesn't it? I said I live within the Cleveland area. I never said I was proud of it. But I love my jobs. And if it means I have to be closer to the city, then it's still worth it to me. It's also not worth wasting your time talking about subject matter that you don't care about. I've already wasted 2 minutes talking about comedians and football. We're off to a great start. Folks, you are tuned into the Five Starr Wrestling Podcast. Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. I already butchered it. The show can only go downhill from here. We still are the wrestling podcast no one knows what everyone needs. We are chugging along through our retro review series. It is the Friday show, so we got WCW and Midsouth to talk about. Be sure to subscribe, comment, give the show a like if you have not already. We are here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays to bring you classic wrestling coverage. The wrestling coverage that I enjoy personally. Like the old Smoky Mountain line. Wrestling the way it used to be and how you like it. I can still hear Bob Caudle's voice as we speak. Not to say that WCW in 1990 was this bastion of wrestling virtuosity. It is still better than a lot of the crap we get today. But yeah, we've definitely surpassed the peak years of WCW. At least in my humble opinion. Not to immediately get everybody on a dour mood from the jump, but... well, let's get into this thing and see where WCW went wrong this week. So we're kind of back to form with these Saturday syndicated shows. That's not necessarily a compliment. But I did learn something. Having seen plenty of Jim Cornette footage throughout my lifetime, I tend to usually pick up on when Corny's in clock in versus clock out mode. And boy, was this ever a great show to exemplify Jim Cornette in clock out mode. He was so beyond over this show before they even rang the bell to start the first match. He's at the point now where he's just burying everything on the program not named the Midnight Express. If the Midnights aren't involved, he doesn't give a fuck. It's so funny to watch. Like, he's at the point now where he knows the shows are absolutely terrible, but he still has to come to work and be an on-screen personality. So now he's basically just there to get himself over. And I don't blame him, honestly. The shows are not good. When you open your syndicated program with a Norman the Lunatic Squash, you know you're in for a rough 2 hours. He wrestled Pat Rose. I think they more or less threw Norman out there just to have him plug the WCW magazine issue for that month. The only other thing I got out of this was JR talking about taking Norman out to lunch the other week. Also getting to see his teddy bear collection. Cornette had a great follow-up line to the lunch comment when he goes, "What kind of loan did you need to take out for that? Or did you wind up charging the meal to the company?" See, the thing is, it's offensive, but the reason it's so great is because you know that Corny's coming up with all that shit on the fly. He and JR aren't sitting down and thinking of clever witticisms to come up with throughout the show. It's all just spur of the moment. That's what always made them such a great pairing together on commentary. JR is the straight shooter, and JC's the bitter, couldn't give two shits less heel color guy who's only concerned about getting the Midnights over. And to be fair, he is still plugging the live events and getting over important details. He's just glossing over trivial stuff that nobody could possibly care about. Such as anything involving Norman the Lunatic. So then they came back to show all the fallout from the Horsemen turning on Sting at the Clash. We also got to relive at least a portion of the lead up to Sting blowing out his ACL during the cage run-in spot at the very end. I'm still convinced that he hurt himself during the spot when he broke away from everybody in the aisleway. Like, they didn't even show the second pull apart when they went to grab Sting and yank him down from the cage the second time. So looking back, maybe I owe Doug Dillinger an apology after all these years. Maybe he wasn't solely responsible for hurting Sting. It was a collective effort along with several other agents, many of whom weren't trained athletes to begin with. So there's a lot that went wrong with the way that spot was laid out. And I'm not going to recount the entire Horseman angle. Go watch the Clash review if you want the full details. We did get an inset with Ole Arn and Flair, talking about how it's good to finally be the real Horseman again. Amen to that, brother. Enough of this babyface Four Horsemen garbage. They said that Sting was dumb enough to think that he could be a Horseman, while at the same time trying to take Ric Flair's livelihood away by challenging for the world title. And so now the Horsemen will bury him. There was also a great line from Flair here where he goes, "We have bled, we have sweat, and we have partied our way across the universe." That is such a tremendous bit of dialogue. They didn't bleed, sweat, and cry their way to the top. No, crying's for pussies, brother. They bled, sweat, and partied to the top of this sport. Because they're men's men. Real men don't cry. They party. I'll tell you two guys who are at the butt end of jokes at parties. The Dynamic Dudes. How's that for a transition? So they played a clip of the dudes wrestling the Mod Squad in Greenville, South Carolina. Apparently to remind everybody that they're still not over and the worst fucking tag team on the roster. No, this was actually a part of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament they're doing. My favorite part in this clip was Terry Funk on commentary having the hardest time trying to plug the wrestling hotline number. In his defense, it was kind of a tongue twister. There were a lot of 9s and 0s to track. It was just funny because Chris Cruz even tried to say the number along with him just to make sure he got it right. He was like a parent trying to teach a toddler how to read a book for the first time. We had the Rock and Roll come out to scout at ringside. I think they were actually coming down to judge both teams and mull over everything not to do in the next round. Let's not be a terrible babyface tag team like Shane and Johnny. So the Jeffers got heat on Shane Douglas for an hour. Johnny Ace made a mediocre babyface comeback. He was briefly cut off so the heels could attempt a high-risk splash move. And then Johnny rolled out of the way and Skullboy one of the Mod Squad dudes for the pin. Still don't know which one is Spike or which one's Basher. Whichever one of them was the skinnier of the two. And so that presumably sets up the Dudes versus the Rock and Roll in round 2. Which is a great rib on the Dudes. The two guys that were explicitly put together to be a bad Rock and Roll Express knockoff. Now they wind up wrestling them in the tournament. And so then we had the Road Warriors versus State Patrol. I love the face-off between Hawk and Lieutenant Parker at the beginning. You could clearly see Hawk mouth the words, "Hit me," right before Parker cheap-shotted him. And then Hawk responded by immediately decking him in the jaw. And JR mentioned the upcoming live event they were running in Chicago. Apparently the Road Warriors were booked to wrestle the Skyscrapers in a Chicago street fight. Which is a scary thought. Dan Spivey in a no DQ street fight environment. Where weapons and gimmicks are legal. After watching him potato fucking Hawk in the back of the head with a chair the other week. I wouldn't trust that numbnut with a gimmick in hand as far as I could throw him. They did cut a good pre-tape promo to plug the match. Hawk with actually one of the more vital lines I've heard in a very long time. And they're talking about how the Skyscrapers have to keep jumping the Road Warriors from behind like cowards. Hawk goes, "Scared men pull knives, but they never use them." Which is not entirely wrong. I mean, cowardly people try to make themselves look tough in situations when they're insecure about themselves. So I thought that was a great quote. Plus, Hawk delivered it, so it would have worked flawlessly on a t-shirt. I did take note of Paul Ellering's look here. What the hell was going on with that mustache-beard combo? He looked like Van Dyke, but with the beard going all the way down to his chest. I never remember him having facial hair that long. It was fucking bizarre. Speaking of things that were bizarre, we had a new job guy appearing this week on the TBS program. A pink-masked man in spandex named Zan Panzer. I don't even know where to begin. The only thing he had going for him was that he looked to be in reasonably decent shape. But the neon pink singlet with no knee pads, along with the signature pink ninja mask, that was a choice. He picked that outfit. Remember that. So he and Sean Regal wrestled the Skyscrapers. I couldn't make out what the fans were chanting during this match, but it sounded something to the effect of, "We want Sting." So in other words, they did not care to see the Skyscrapers wrestle this week. Can only imagine why. Boring squash. Spivey got the win with a power bomb on Whatsy Whoosy. He did have a very strange line during his pre-tape promo where he talked about how the Skyscrapers are like big yellow buses. The Road Warriors don't have to pay to get on, but they will have to pay to get off. What? Like, okay, even if that made a lick of sense, it was still a dumbass comment to make. What was he talking about? Was he referring to school buses? Or was he just talking about packed buses, period? He does realize that you have to pay to get on packed buses, right? Before you can ride. That's sort of baked into the equation. I don't know. I did laugh when Mark gave Sean Regal the rope walk elbow drop after the bell. I think at this point he was basically auditioning live for Vince McMahon. He's like, "Hey, check out what I can do, Vince. Not that I'm looking for an excuse to get out of this hellhole down south, but sign me, please." Sorry, I had to stop the recording there for a sec to check out what the hell that buzzing sound was. In any case, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, Mark Calloway trying to get out of WCW so he can make more money. I'm sure the Midnights were in that same boat, looking for any excuse to get the hell out of this godforsaken company. They had a squash with Rob Idol and Paul Drake. Cornette plugged the upcoming match with them in the Rock and Roll for Wrestle War at the end of the month. Probably the one added benefit of going back to the well with the Midnight Rock and Roll feud one final time. It is getting the Midnight's boot on TV again, which was sort of a recurring issue since their heel turn late last year. Getting the fans to hate the Midnights has been like pulling teeth. So Bobby and Stan sleptwalked through most of the match before winning with the Vegematic. And I say that as somebody who's also claimed that the Midnight Express are my all-time favorite tag team. But, yeah, this was Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane on autopilot mode. Not that I'm disagreeing with them being unhappy at this point. Just calling a spade a spade. Low value effort here. Then we had Doug Furnas taking on one of the Galaxians. And yes, especially for those that have been following the Retro Raw reviews, yes, it was that Doug Furnas. He actually had a brief run here in WCW in 1990 before he went to Japan. He was also much bigger and jacked than he was before he came back to work for the WWF in the late 90s. He was billed as the world's strongest man, which, I mean, he wasn't that jacked. Many wrestlers have called themselves the world's strongest men before. Doug Furnas being among those names, it's a bit of a stretch. Now that said, anything I've ever mentioned about Doug Furnas during the WWF reviews, the same principle applies here. Great athlete, great ring worker, great look, but he just never was able to master the art of being a captivating personality, which is what prevented him from breaking through that proverbial glass ceiling of becoming a superstar. I do have to say, though, many people talk about the guys that had the best drop kicks in wrestling. Doug Furnas never gets enough credit for how damn good his drop kick was. I've seen him do it a few times in WWF matches, but the one he gave the Galaxian here, where he essentially did a full backflip after executing the kick, that was a thing of beauty, man. And they gave him some promo time afterward, which, it was fine. But that's really the only way I can best coin it. It was fine. He talked a little about his football background. He and JR knew each other personally, so they were able to have a decent conversation about some of Doug's high school experiences. But there was no flair to anything he said. It was all very plain and vanilla. Which is unfortunate, because you look at a guy like Doug Furnas and you think, that guy could have been a really solid upper middle card babyface had he gotten more seasoning. But by, early fall of 90? I think that's when Doug left to go back to All Japan, right? And by the time he came back to the States years later, he was in ECW for a cup of coffee. Then he had the WWF run with Phil LaFawn, where, we're all kind of witnessing the issue with their run there. More like a right place, wrong time kind of situation. During a time when the WWF was becoming edgier and grittier as a product, you had Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn trying to work these straight technical Japanese-style matches. And they're coming off like wet popcorn farts in church because, the people just don't really care about them. It is unfortunate, but not everybody was blessed with being a megastar in this industry. The majority of them never do, for being honest. And the same can kind of be said about guys like Brian Pillman. Although Pillman's story is much more tragic than Doug Furnas's. I'm still mesmerized when I go back and watch goody two-shoes, happy to be there, smiley babyface Pillman. Contrasting that with the version of Pillman that everybody sort of immediately gravitates to. He did one of those inset promos talking about the Sting situation, how he was so disappointed to see one of his mentors in Ric Flair turn on Sting in the way he did. The guy that took Pillman under his wing and taught him to be a reasonably good man. So now Pillman wants Flair to come meet him face to face to explain his actions. And, well, to apparently come up with a solution. As if the solution wasn't already made. They already fucked Sting over and kicked him out of the Horsemen. But Pillman still thinks they can work something out. Poor young naive Brian. He just... He was too green. Too inexperienced. He just doesn't understand how the Nature Boy works. Now he's calling out the head honcho to meet him for an in-ring discussion. Can only imagine how that's going to go down. So we come back for more footage of the U.S. Tag Tournament. This one was Zank and Pillman taking on the Royal Family. The now repackaged Jack Victory and Rib Morgan. Because they weren't getting over as a New Zealand militia. Surely they'll get over being fake descendants of British royalty. Funny thing is, I completely forgot about Lord Littlebrook being the main key to forming this tag team. Makes it even more hilarious when I think back to last week's Mid-South episode. Wasn't Littlebrook one of the minis that teamed up with Jack Victory in that 6-man tag? How about that? That's where the relationship began. It dates all the way back to Mid-South 85 when Littlebrook and Victory were randomly paired together in a midget 6-man tag. Kidding aside, match wasn't half bad. Victory was bumping his ass off for the babyfaces at various points here. There was one spot where he ate a drop kick from Zank and flew off the apron and smashed into the barricade. Took a sick bump on the concrete. Good heat sequence on Pillman. He hit the Royal Family with a neat double drop kick to set up the hot tag to Z-Man. The finish I thought was a little goofy, but it still worked. They did a spot where Victory tried to cut off Z-Man so Morgan could lay on top for the cover. But then Pillman ran in to drop an elbow on Morgan to roll Zank on top of him so he could get the pin. And of course, Jack Victory's an idiot, so he wasn't paying attention. Completely missed the finish. You know, you look at this team, obviously Pillman and Zank were the team they were trying to spotlight in the tournament. So them going over wasn't surprising. I continue to assert that the Pillman-Zank pairing was kind of an acquired taste for a lot of people. I wasn't a fan, but that was primarily because I didn't give a shit about Tom Zank, and I mainly just wanted to see Pillman get spotlighted. But WCW obviously saw something in the both of them, which is how we wound up getting both of them as a team. It is leading to easily their best feud as a pairing. Them in the Midnights as we lead into the summertime. So we at least have that to look forward to. Before they completely kill all interest in the program due to bad booking. But we'll get to that. Let's talk about this Louisville Slugger interview between Jim Cornette and Dr. Death. There was, there was something that happened recently with Dr. Death at the Clash that I'm forgetting about. Maybe this will refresh my memory. Oh yeah, that's right. So, this whole segment was kind of strange. Let's start from the beginning here and try to work our way through it. So JC's trying to be all chummy with Dr. Death from the beginning. And he keeps mentioning something about this favor that Williams apparently did for Cornette in the Midnights. and how Williams did the favor for Cornette, but he still doesn't consider them friends, mainly because he knows that Cornette's the kind of guy that would stab anybody in the back if things didn't go his way. And I'm sitting there listening to this like, what favor? What are these guys talking about? Did something err or happen in the last several days that we're not being caught up to speed with? Because I have no idea what Dr. Death is talking about here. You know, it's like all of a sudden he's teasing a heel turn for no discernible reason I can think of. And so then they start talking about the match that was supposed to happen with Luger and Dr. Death for the U.S. title at Wrestle War, which obviously that didn't happen because they had to come up with a replacement opponent for Sting to face Flair for the title. Which tells me that they either taped this without having a backup plan for Sting in mind, or they figured Sting wasn't badly injured enough to where he couldn't wrestle in 3 weeks. And they were hedging their bets that he would be perfectly healthy to work at the pay-per-view. In either case, they were still under the presumption that Dr. Death versus Luger was going to be set in stone. So he promised here that he would be the new U.S. title champion. That was a direct quote. And then he kept getting the dates wrong for when the actual pay-per-view was taking place. First it was February 25th. Then by the end of the segment, it was February 26th. So the conclusion here is that Dr. Death was not a good promo. And even better, he was cutting a promo for a title match that never happened. So the whole thing was pointless. Also important to remember, Dr. Death is only around for like another 3 weeks before he leaves. So whatever plans they were originally teasing with him and Cornette trying to become aligned, none of that ever went anywhere. So then after they replayed the angle with Doom unmasking at the Clash, we had the Steiners taking on Bob Cook and the Italian Stallion. The highlight of this segment was the Lucky Kid at ringside getting to hold the tag belts for the camera. That had to be the best day of that kid's life. Scotty got the win with a Frankensteiner. And you know, it's one of those things where we just reviewed the match they had with Doom for the belts. But all throughout the show, they were making such a huge deal about reintroducing the U.S. tag belts, the whole tournament they're doing to crown new champions. It's almost like they were undercutting the world tag belts as a result. And, I mean, let's be fair. I was a huge Steiner Brothers fan growing up. But they weren't exactly lighting the world on fire as champions. I think they kind of peaked at the point they beat the Freebirds on TV to win them in the first place. Everything they've done with them since that point has been kind of mid. And like aside from maybe the Midnight Express, which was never going to be a full-fledged program because Jim Hurt's a fucking moron, what other top feuds could they really have done with the Steiners as champions? If you want to go the traditional babyface heel route. They already did the program with the Freebirds. They were obviously going to run back the Doom match later on. But, like, they didn't have a ton of options. Or at least good options. They could have done the Skyscrapers. That would have been horrible. How about the Royal Family? Child, please. You know, I guess they could have also done a feud with Ole and Arn. That would have been great. I don't know why they didn't think to book that program heading into the summer. And on the topic of the handsome twosome, Ole and Arnie, they quickly plugged the return of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. And they did, in fact, directly call out the Steiner brothers. I'm also not sure if that was just a general comment or if that was storyline related. I don't remember. So that led to Keith Hart versus the Gladiator. They actually gave the Gladiator an inset promo to call out Sting and issue a challenge. Because again, the presumption seems to be that Sting was not that badly injured. And in fact, I believe this match is being advertised for next week. Which, I have to wait and see if they actually went through with that match. There's no way that officially happened, right? Unless Sting was working on one leg. I do love the idea that they gave one of the recurring TV jobbers a big win just to effectively set up a meaningless TV match next week, where we know he was ultimately going to job anyway. You gotta make the Gladiator look like a beast going into this match with Sting. As if anybody had any doubts on who would have gone over in that situation. But it's like I keep saying, man, they were really betting the farm that Sting was going to be healthy to wrestle at the pay-per-view. Even coming from the Stinger himself. He was talking with Gordon Soley in this pre-taped interview about the whole situation, banking on the 25th and saying he would walk out as a new world heavyweight champion, which, well, that was a blatant false advertisement. I really would like to know the backstory here, because I'm genuinely confused. When did they tape all these pre-tapes? Do they shoot all those before the Clash? Because I know they're all green screen interviews, and they just kind of splice them in throughout the show as needed. But did they record them before the Clash and then realize, well, shit, we already put together the 2-hour show this week, so guess we got to air them anyway? Or were they just really expecting Sting to be healthy enough to wrestle at the pay-per-view? Did they not know that it was an ACL tear? And that Sting would be out for a considerable amount of time? I don't know, it's a very bizarre time frame we're in, because we know Sting doesn't wrestle at the pay-per-view. We also know that he's hurt. So somebody just figured, fuck it, we're sticking with the original plan and presume he'll be fine in a few weeks. Give him time to heal and we'll go through with the matches advertised. It's like I'm watching in a parallel universe. But with that, we come to our TV main event. It is Wildfire Tommy Rich taking on Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. By the way, there was a Kevin Sullivan promo with JR that I completely tuned out of. I have no idea what he said, and frankly, I didn't care enough to go back to rewind and listen. Something about strange things coming to WCW, because Kevin is a prognosticator of violence and terror, or something like that. The same guy that just battled Norman the Lunatic in a women's bathroom 4 days prior in a comedy match. Now he's predicting the future of WCW in 1990. I don't know. So Rich versus Sawyer. It was a solid 10 minutes of back and forth action. More accurately, it was 8 minutes of solid action and 2 minutes of really damn good wrestling in the lead up to the finish. And Rich kind of worked Sawyer's arm and shoulder over from the spot they did early on when Sawyer posted himself. Sawyer did all his usual biting spots and typical stuff we would expect to see out of the Mad Dog, intimidating the referee. They do a deal at the end where Sawyer misses a big splash, and then right as Rich goes to shoot him off, Sawyer turns it into a power slam and grabs a handful of Rich's tights to steal the pinfall. I can't remember what JR said, but I think he mentioned something about these two having a run-in or some kind of issue on one of the other syndicated programs. I don't know what would have happened, but apparently an angle went down between these two of some description. Would have been nice if maybe they could have shown what happened. Because the only thing I had to go on here was a cold match with two guys to wrap up an already uneventful, boring 2-hour program. Like I said, it was a fine match, just from my vantage point, it didn't really have a lot of backstory. Not that every main event needs a backstory. But a lot of the show is also going to be dealing with the fallout of the Sting Horseman angle from the Clash. It is a very odd scenario with how they're going about handling it right now. I have to assume they'll have some sort of explanation for how they wind up replacing Luger in that title match with Flair. For the life of me, I don't remember what angle or occurrence that led up to that moment. The only thing I remember offhand is Sting gets hurt at the Clash, then Luger inexplicably turns face from out of nowhere, and he gets put in the match with Flair instead. Everything that happens in between is stuff that I've completely neglected over time. So we'll see how they resolve that issue. But it was another week of lukewarm WCW syndicated programming. Not the worst batch we've seen thus far. This one was mainly boring and highly forgettable. I know for a fact they're about to become increasingly worse as we move throughout the year. So maybe I should be thankful that this one didn't send me over the edge. Although, sometimes bad shows are the ones I look forward to the most. Gives me plenty to rant about. But that is the opposite of what's going on with Midsouth television here in 85. These shows are far from bad. In fact, they're pretty damn great, all things considered. They've been dealing out a handful of full house decks with these early 85 shows. Like, just when you think the previous week's show blew you away, the following week is even better. And really, the formula's not that hard. For everybody that thinks booking pro wrestling needs to be this convoluted, overly mapped out sequence of months-long story progression, couldn't be any further from the truth. You know what we need? God bless them while they're still alive. I would love to see Jerry Lawler or Bill Dundee put together some kind of brief novel about the art of booking pro wrestling. Doesn't have to be long. Just like 100 pages to explain what booking pro wrestling is like, things they learn from experience, the do's and don'ts, and just give the fans an idea of what booking used to be like during the territory days. Before everybody started being trained to think that booking was the same thing as writing for television. That's why I hate this fucking notion that Vince Russo put out years ago that he hates calling what he did booking, because he considers himself a writer. He's a storyteller, bro. He writes the television show, bro. Fucking dim-witted New York moron. It is something, though, that nobody's ever thought to come up with. And it's unfortunate. All these great wrestling autobiographies that exist, but there's never been a topic done on booking. You know, especially with the boys that had experience with it and understand what it was like back in the day. It'd be awesome to see one of those get published before they're all gone. Unfortunately, that's probably never going to happen. So anyway, we began this week with them replaying Foreigner's Dirty White Boy video from the other week, hyping up our in-ring debut of the Dirty White Boys. I still can't believe that song came out in like 1980. You think, what are some of the more politically incorrect things you could not get away with saying in 2026? Calling yourself a dirty white boy. That is certainly at the top of the list. Meanwhile, Tony Anthony basically had that same gimmick for another 10 years before he went to the WWF. So we get them taking on Shawn Michaels and Tim Horner in the opener. I still love hearing them bill Anthony and Denton from Bucksnort, Tennessee. No joke, I legitimately thought that was a gimmick town until I heard Jim Cornette mention one time it's an actual city. So the DWBs took turns beating the teetotal shit out of Michaels and Horner. It was kind of funny at the finish where they hit Shawn with a double Russian leg sweep. You're expecting them to immediately go for a pinfall attempt. And then for absolutely no reason, Len Denton decides he's going to pick Shawn back up and give him a fall-away slam off his shoulders. And then he pinned him. It was so unnecessary, which is why I loved it. I also do need to recant a statement I made the other week about the Dirty White Boys, because I made a comment about them originally debuting in Midsouth as babyfaces. I don't know where I got the idea that was a thing, but I could have sworn they came into Midsouth as babyfaces when they started. But maybe I'm thinking of a different team. Kind of in the same vein as two guys that came from another territory that were booked as heels, but then they showed up as babyfaces in Mid-South. I don't know who I'm thinking of, but it was not the Dirty White Boys. I now can confirm. There's your weekly reminder that I'm not a complete wrestling nerd. So then we had a replay of the Duggan Dr. Death match from the other week, where Duggan had driven Steve's forearm into the steel post and broke it, allegedly. Come to find out it was actually a stress fracture, according to Steve's doctors. So they pitched to a pre-taped interview with him and JR where, well, I'll go ahead and put it bluntly. Steve basically cut a babyface promo saying that he may be injured. He's got his arm taped up to try to prevent further damage. But he's been around gyms all over the country, and he knows the motto, no pain, no gain. If you don't wrestle, you don't get paid. So he's going to put on that protective arm pad, and he's going to get right back in the ring to take the fight to Duggan. Now, I'm obviously being a little facetious with the babyface promo comment, but the verbiage there was by and large taken directly. He's working an injury and storyline, but he is still going to wrestle and go after Duggan because he's a badass. And he doesn't back down from anybody, bad arm or not. So then we go to the ring for some tag action. It's Dr. Death teaming up with the debuting Edgar Boo Thomas, an Oklahoma native and former University of Oklahoma football player. They wrestled Mark Cooper and Mike Jackson. When I saw that name flash up on screen, Edgar Boo Thomas, there's a name I haven't thought about in ages. I forget, did we get a chance to review anything he did in World Class? We may not have gotten to that point, because I know he was there. I don't think it was in 85 or 86. Might have been later on. To be frank, I don't remember much about him. I know he was here in Midsouth for a little bit, did some work in Dallas. I think he may have gone to the Central States region for a little bit. And I think the rumor was he got out of wrestling due to conflicts with the office in various places he wrestled. I mean, they set up the story here that he came into Midsouth as Dr. Death's protege, or understudy, if you will. Between attitude problems and him just not being very good, you can see why he eventually phased out of the business altogether. The fact that he looked like a monkey trying to fuck a football out there with Mike Jackson, that should tell you everything. If you can't have a good match with Mike Jackson, you need to get the fuck out of the ring and hang the boots up. There's no hope for you. So he did some sloppy spots at the beginning and then stood on the apron for the rest of the match so Dr. Death could carry the load. Edgar Boo Thomas. The guy that made Sonny King look like fucking Bret Hart in his prime. That's a scary thought. So then we came back for the greatest segment of all time. It is time for our official Best Man Suit contest. Time to find out who the classiest and best dressed athlete in Mid-South is. Voted on by the totally not biased Mid-South Irish McNeil Boys Club fans. They've been hyping this one for a while, and well, we got a payoff of some description. At least partially. So we come back from break with Ted DiBiase in the ring. In addition to his suit, he's also carrying a baseball bat, because he still has PTSD from what happened several weeks ago when Duggan pulled a lead pipe on DiBiase and made him shit his pants. So DiBiase's keeping the bat for safekeeping, in case Duggan is hiding another gimmick when he comes out. And he'll only give it up if the referees search Duggan and ensure he's not concealing anything. So Duggan comes down and gets the full airport security touch and feel treatment. And let's recall the rules for this contest. The Mid-South fans get to pick and choose the winner via cheering the loudest. That is the only stipulation. They're not being judged on a particular suit pattern or camera poses or grooming. You know, something that would be definitive criteria for a suit contest. No, it's the fans cheer for whoever is best dressed based on their own personal biased opinions. So naturally, guess who they all pick? It's Duggan unanimously. At which point DiBiase very justly goes into a tirade about how the whole contest was rigged from the start, how he stood no chance of winning because everybody's biased against him. So next week he wants a rematch, but it's going to be electronically monitored, so there's no denying who the actual winner is. And it's great because it's one of those segments where there really is no way for them to monitor how the crowd is going to react. They can't point a gun at them all and say, you must cheer for Duggan because you'll fuck up our storyline if you vote DiBiase as the better dressed man. No, of course they were always going to vote for Duggan, because he's a good guy and DiBiase's a bad guy. And this was back during a time when the fans genuinely hated all the heels and loved all the baby faces. So they knew they could get away with doing this. Now, picture them doing the same thing in 2026 in front of smarter fans. You know, what happens if the people end up choosing the heel instead? How do you backdoor your way out of that? And yes, I'm aware the whole thing is very campy and silly. But here's why this all gets over so well. The entire premise for this feud has been DiBiase claiming that he's superior to Duggan in every way imaginable. Not just as a wrestler, but also as a classy, well-groomed man. And while sure, DiBiase is more clean-cut than Duggan, the whole thing continues to backfire on him because he can't get over one on Duggan, no matter how hard he tries. And it's escalating to the point now where you're thinking, how's DiBiase going to plot out the rematch next week? Surely something has to go down in that segment. Guess we'll all wait and see. Then we had Kamala taking on Hacksaw Butch Reed in a match voted on by the fans. I seriously need to question the logic of Midsouth fans viewing this as a dream match. Maybe a fever dream. I had high hopes when Butch Reed came out with the war paint on. And the minute Kamala cut him off and started working him over on the mat in nerve holds, the whole thing came to a screeching halt for a while. I started cackling during Reed's comeback when he starts throwing punches at Kamala, and he didn't even try to register any of the punches. It looked like Reed punching an inflatable balloon for like 15 seconds. So yeah, the match itself was god-awful ugly. But then they do all the running angle stuff at the end with Akbar and Friday hitting the ring. Buddy Landell came in for a distraction. By the end, he had like half the locker room in the ring fighting. The big payoff here was Dr. Death laying out Reed with the loaded arm pad, which you figured was going to be gimmicked when he revealed it to Jim Ross earlier in that pre-tape. JR noting, "Yup, that looks like a totally safe and legally usable arm pad. No reason to question anything here." And then, of course, Duggan ran in with the 2x4 and sent everybody fleeing. And apparently that was okay, even though they supposedly banned the 2x4 in Mid-South. I'm still not crystal clear on how that rule works. I thought at first it was nobody's permitted to bring a chain, chair, tennis racket, or 2x4 down to ringside during any situation. Then it became only during sanctioned matches. Now apparently it's only when the babyfaces are trying to clear the ring and make this safe for other babyfaces. Then it's permitted. I know I'm overthinking everything. I tend to do that as a semi-autistic wrestling fan. But a little bit of consistency would be great every now and then. And so, well, one thing that needs to be mentioned during that brawl sequence, Terry Taylor was injured in storyline, and he was also set to defend the television title against Jake Roberts this week. So when they come back from break and announce that Terry's unable to compete because of what happened, Jake immediately starts ripping into him and demands that injury or no injury, he signed for a TV title match this week, and he wants it now. And well, he doesn't get Terry Taylor. Instead, he gets Brad Armstrong. And of course, Jake immediately starts to try to blow him off and talk down like Brad's beneath his level. And it finally boils over when Jake looks at Brad and goes, "You're not as good as your washed-up father." And that struck a chord. Brad retorted by popping Jake in the mouth. And I have to say, before I mention anything else, that is one of the first real authentic heel promos we've heard Jake cut in Midsouth since he debuted. It's amazing how much of a natural talker that guy was from the beginning. He was so great during this segment. Then we get his awesome sinister moment where Jake responds by telling Brad that he signed for a match with Terry and he's going to get that match first. But when he's through with him, he's coming for Brad. And he does the classic slither spot where he stares Brad down and slides underneath the bottom rope to leave. Oh, what a fucking moment, dude. Jake Roberts. Can't ever say enough good about him. Yeah, he had a rough career. It was never all sunshine and rainbows for him. But what a talent that guy was. He just naturally knew how to be a convincing villain. The it factor that regrettably never came to reach its fullest potential. And so that brought us to the Rock and Roll Express defending their tag belts against the Alamo Busters. The rematch from 3 weeks ago when Hector and Chavo stole the belts from Ricky and Robert. But then Midsouth awarded the belts back to the Rock and Roll due to chicanery from Jim Cornette. And it is another situation where they assigned 2 referees for this thing. I got a kick out of Bill Watts setting the stage early on that Hector and Chavo were complaining earlier in the day that the second referee for this match wasn't Mexican. And how Midsouth tried to find a Mexican referee to officiate this match, but couldn't find one. Apparently it wasn't as easy as flying down to Mexico and seeing if any promoters could loan a Mexican referee for a day. So the action here was a lot of fun. The match they had, whatever it was, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I still think that one was better. But this was still a great TV main event. And them having 2 officials led to some cool spots early on where Carl Fergie and Ronnie West were debating over legal tags and guys getting in the ring illegally when the other ref wasn't paying attention. Mainly in that case when Hector and Chavo were trying to cheat. But we had a great spot right before the commercial where the Rock and Roll are running wild on the heels and hitting him with a double drop kick sequence, sending him ass over tea kettle to the floor. Crowd's going nuts for all that. They came back with the heels controlling the pace for a little bit. I popped for the spot right before Ricky's hot tag where Chavo goes to do a backflip out of the corner to try to do a running charge at Robert. But then Robert elbows him in the head. Chavo does this great bump where he stumbles out of the corner and then reaches over his head to tag in Hector right before he eats the mat. Oh, so perfectly timed. So you get Ricky's House of Fire comeback for a minute. They end up bumping both referees at the finish so the heels could illegally work over Ricky. And while they have Ricky in a surfboard stretch, Hector's going to try to go up top for a big move. And then Carl Fergie busts him. And he threatens a DQ if he comes off the top. So then Roberts sneaks in and cuts him off. And, well, at some point, apparently, the referees decided they were too concussed to try to enforce any rolls or tags. So the match arbitrarily became a tornado rolls match with no explanation. Then as both teams are fighting back and forth and going for multiple pin attempts on one another, by that point they're basically running out the clock because the match is going to go to a time limit draw. So we get like 3 minutes of brawling and bodies hitting all over ringside. Eventually they cut to the end credits right as we see Hector and Chavo bonk heads and fall to the mat. It was a little bit of a dud finish, but they kind of had to go there in order to set up the end result. This has been one of those feuds that I truly forgot just how underrated it was back in the day. I love everything about this program. And I wouldn't even really consider it a top feud in the territory right now. At least compared to everything else going on currently. But it's a damn good feud. And has a lot of similarities when you think to the conversation we have about Duggan and DiBiase. Another case where the heels just can't get one over on the babyfaces. Despite all their efforts at cheating and playing the heel card. They've been fantastic, Hector and Chavo have, being these snobby, whiny foreign heels. You know, moaning that Midsouth keeps fucking them around because of their heritage. How the company continues to collude against them. It's all great stuff, man. Another example of why booking wrestling doesn't have to be this elaborate blueprint. You know, I know things were a lot simpler back in the day, but really it's not rocket surgery. Especially when you're a competent promoter that sees what gets over and what doesn't. Lord knows Tony Khan could ever pick up on that clue. Maybe his product wouldn't suck so bad if he stopped trying to cater to niche audiences and started focusing on getting over talent that could feasibly draw money. But who am I kidding? Ain't nobody in that company drawing shit. There you go. It's going to round out another one. That was a fun Friday show. Didn't seem like we talked about it a lot, but I had fun with it. So, here's the deal. Just in case I failed to mention this on the Monday podcast, there will be a Monday show, and then next week there will not be a Friday podcast because I will be going out of town again. And, yeah, you know how it be. Sometimes work gets in the way of things, but that's life. So, no Friday show next week. Just be aware of that. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in to the 5 Starr Wrestling Report. Appreciate everybody that comes back to check out the show every week. And we'll catch you on Monday. And I'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Peace out.